Californians for Electoral Reform, and ProRep Coalition. And I believe she also participates in the League's local Environmental Action Committee. So she's busy. Today, we'll discuss how the American two-party system has empowered political extremes, fostered incentives for tribalism, and prevented the majority of more moderate voters from holding their party or parties accountable at the polls. We'll have a few minutes left after her presentation for questions, and we'll use a mic traveling around the room to handle the questions. So please now welcome Lorelei Moozbrugger. She helps us understand more about the current government that we're experiencing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try to move this a bit. Can you hear me in the back? Good. Okay. I know as a professor that the first thing I need to do to have an effective learning experience is to begin with student interest. I have to say that if there's a silver lining to the current chaos that we're all experiencing, it is that that goal is already met. So, I want to just begin with a phrase that we've been using since ancient Greece times. United we stand, divided we fall. And obviously I borrowed the last half to be the title of my talk today. Now normally it's used to inspire unity and cooperation. But it's also a warning, and it's a warning that division and self-serving will lead to, I'm going to move this a bit. It's kind of intimidating. Okay. Anyway, that divided we fall is a warning that self-serving and division will lead to our collective decline. Division not only thwarts our ability to make decisions in the common good, but it also undermines our faith in the political system and in each other. And it makes us vulnerable to enemies, foreign and domestic, who would stoke our divisions to serve their own nefarious ends. Let's begin with the fall. I don't know how many of you saw this. On May 14th, the New York Times had this article and this video. I'm sorry. There we go. And it was by 3 Yale professors. I'm sorry, my screen won't stay. By 3 Yale professors who study fascism. It was Timothy Snyder, Marcy Shore, and Jason Stanley. Most of you probably know Timothy Snyder. He wrote On Tyranny and also The Road to Unfreedom. And Marcy Shore is a historian who studies fascism, and James Stanley wrote a book called How Propaganda Works. They know what they're talking about. And 3 of them have decided to leave their positions at Yale University and move to the University of Toronto. If you haven't read that article, I put up a QR code so that you could see it, and this will be available online later as well. But what they're saying is that the time is actually late. We are sliding toward authoritarianism, and they're not alone. The Authoritarian Threat Index, which is actually a reflection of weekday surveys, Monday through Friday, every day, of a subset of scholars who study democracy and democratic decline and political institutions, et cetera, and they find that we are in severe threat. I'm going to have to look at your slides because I can't see mine. We are in severe threat of authoritarianism. Whether you look at elections and voting, or you look at the overreach of the executive, usurping the power of Congress, or the rule of law in all of these areas, we are sliding toward authoritarianism. In fact, what they find is the 4-year likelihood of democratic breakdown they put at 19.2%. Now, they aren't alone. Average Americans know this too. You don't need to be a scholar of fascism to understand what's going on. The Public Religion Research Institute is a nonprofit organization, and they recently did a survey. And what they found was that a majority of Americans agree with this statement: President Trump is a dangerous dictator whose power should be limited. A majority, 52%. 44% would say the opposite. They say that Trump is a strong leader who should be given the power he needs to make America great. 44%. Why is that? Why is it that we can have a majority of Americans and all of these experts understand what's going on, and yet, when you look at the polls, we have extremely strong support for President Trump? Somewhere between 83 and 90% of Republicans continue to support him. When you look at how many Democrats support, you are looking at single digits, anywhere from 2 to 6%. That is dramatic, and that isn't normal, but it's becoming normal. I apologize. I need to adjust this again because my screen isn't what your screen is. So you have to ask yourself what's going on. After all, this is the United States of America. Democracy literally defines us, all right? That's what it means to have the land of the free and the home of the brave. Our origin story is our belief in self-government. So how can it be that when you're slipping toward authoritarianism, half of Americans approximately still support those efforts? Well, the reason is because we live in a two-party system, and majorities don't matter in a two-party system. What matters is having the support of your political party, whatever side that is. Now, many people want to know what they're thinking, though. So let's ask that question seriously. It's not a rhetorical question. Let's begin with who they are, all right? When you ask yourself who is supporting this side, what you find is what we all hear on the news all the time. Mostly white men between the ages of 45 and 64 without a college degree. That's who's supporting this. And that made me think of a recent book called Deaths of Despair. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this book. It came out in 2020. It's written by Ann Case and Angus Deaton. And what you're seeing up there is their research that they looked into when they found that for the first time in our history, we were seeing a decline in life expectancy for Americans. For all Americans, we witnessed a decline beginning in 2015. That should not happen, all right? It goes in the reverse direction. Life expectancy goes up, not down. And when they unpacked the data, what they found was it wasn't declining for everybody, it was declining for a small subset of Americans, white Americans between the ages of 45 and 54 without a college degree. That's who was bringing that mortality rate up and our life expectancy down. And when they looked at that data, they could separate out white Americans from Hispanics. And so what you're looking at there is in the United States, white Americans, an increase in mortality beginning beginning in the 90s, at the late 90s. We don't see that in the statistics writ large until 2015, but it actually began quite a bit earlier. If you look at all of those other lines, you're looking at France, Germany, US whites that are Hispanic, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and Sweden. all right? That's the way it looks in advanced democracies, but not for this particular subset of Americans. Now, this really spoke to me because I understand what's going on. I understand those deaths of despair. What they had found was that these people were dying largely due to alcohol poisoning, suicides, all right, and overdoses, this particular subset. And I thought, I know what that looks like. And I understand their argument that this is because of a set of public policies about jobs and health care, all right, that left these people vulnerable and did, in fact, leave them behind. And I understood because I grew up in a factory town in the Midwest where American Motors was the dominant employer. And by dominant employer, I mean that they employed nearly 1/3 of the working class population in that town. 16,000 people worked in one automobile assembly plant. It was huge. It took up the entire middle of the city I grew up in. It was 107 acres big. That is about 50 city blocks square. All of those people worked there. And I watched it when that plant closed. And all of those people lost their jobs. 16,000 people. And my dad worked there. My grandfather worked there. It was a great thing. A lot of people, like my dad, quit high school in order to work there because that was a ticket to the middle class. And it was for a lot of people across the country. It was a great thing. And so when those jobs disappeared almost overnight, tragedy struck that town. One day my dad came home and he had dread in his face. And he said one of his friends, who had always worked there, had taken his life. He had taken his life because he couldn't support his family, he couldn't support his children. They weren't going to get to go to college. He was probably going to lose his home. And for sure, because he lived in the United States, he was losing his health care. And the health care for everyone that he loved. That's what it looked like. What Case and Deaton find is that after correction for inflation, the median wages of American men have been stagnant for half a century, 50 years. And when you look at white men without a 4-year degree, they've actually decreased 13% in purchasing power from 1979 to 2017. Meanwhile, for the rest of us, incomes have grown by 85% per capita over that same period of time. How does that happen? Well, how it happens is between January of 2010 and 2019, nearly 16 million jobs were created, but only 3 million were created for people without a 4-year degree. Moreover, of that 16 million, only 55,000 were created for people with only a high school education. That's how that happened. So it should not be surprising to us that working class whites no longer believe that democracy can help them. Case and Deaton found that in 2016, more than 2/3 of white working class Americans believed that elections were controlled by the rich and the big corporations, so it didn't matter if they voted. Analysis by political scientists says, yeah, that's right. You got that one. It doesn't. That Democratic and Republican lawmakers consistently vote for the interests of their more prosperous constituents with little attention to the interests of others. Now, Case and Deaton, they cite a number of studies. You can look in their book. You can read all of the evidence. I'm just going to show you one. Research from 2014 shows the responsiveness of our government to preferences by average Americans or preferences by economic elites. And what you find is that no matter what average Americans think, politicians don't respond with laws. If no one wants a policy, politicians are about 30% likely to make that policy anyway. And if 100% of average citizens want a policy, Politicians are about 30% likely to respond with a policy. That top graph is their response to our preferences, and it's a flat line. There is no response. But if you look at economic elites and you look at economic interest groups, you see an entirely different story. What you see is a positive response. What you see is what we expect out of democracy for all of us. The more of us that want a policy, the more likely it is that you're going to get it. But it's not true. It's not just a story about us and them. It's not a story about white people without a college degree whose lives have been disrupted and those for whom globalization works. This is a story about all of us. The one thing I know about everyone is that we care very much for our children. We want our children to be successful, and we want them to be happy. And so you would expect that the one thing we could get done is to take care of our kids. And yet, when you look at where we are, the United States, in education and health care, we rank 27th. Now, in the 90s, we ranked 6th. All right, we were proud of what we could do. But by the time of this survey, which I think is 2018, yes, we couldn't. All right? So it shouldn't really be surprising to us that at this point, more than 50% of the adults in this country can't read past the 6th grade level. And in order to fill the jobs of that globalized economy that we love, we bring in people oftentimes from the poorest countries in the world when we're the richest. And it's not just education. When you look at this headline, which I bet most of you saw, it was widely distributed. In 2020, for the very first time, firearms were the leading cause of death for US children. And a lot of people talked about that. But frankly, that was kind of misleading, because firearms aren't the leading cause of death for white kids. That's car accidents, just like it's always been. Firearms are the leading cause of death for black kids. And those deaths are from homicides. And they are at such a rate that they have now changed that outcome statistic for all children in the United States. I don't have time to go into all of the things that led up to such a situation. However, I do think it's probably connected to this. This is the racial wealth gap in the United States. You see white families on top with the blue line, and despite the drop during the great economic recession of 2008, they're doing pretty well. And on the bottom, you see black families and Latino families. And they are not, and they haven't been, and nothing has changed through administrations. When it comes to the environment, all of our futures, a lot of people are out there. I'm on the Environmental Action Committee. We're fighting as many good fights as we can. But I tell you, the fights that we're fighting, they should have been won 30 years ago. It's like throwing starfish into the sea. I'm glad we're doing it, but all of the indicators tell us we are losing the war. And frankly, the United States is the biggest reason why. Our policies. It's a crisis. It's a crisis of American democracy, and I know that we want to look at that big shiny object in the room and blame this on a rogue president. But that would be wrong. It's simply not the case. At any time that they want to, the party can control the president. They can take their power back in Congress. They can use their power in the states, but they're choosing not to because we live in a two-party system. Our elections are uncompetitive, our politicians are unresponsive, and our parties are unaccountable. And I want to show you why. I want to begin with this image. This is about political competition. When you take a class in democracy, it starts with you gotta have multiple parties and they have to be able to compete. When you look at political competition in the United States, over this period from 1992 until 2012, what you see was that in 1992, about a quarter of the seats from the House of Representatives were up for grabs. We didn't know who would win until they won, until the votes were counted. About a quarter of the seats for the House of Representatives were, by contrast, decided in the primary, before even one vote was cast in the general election. We knew who was going to win, and we knew which party was going to win by a landslide. By the time you get to 2012, now you have over 50% of the seats being won in a landslide, where before a vote is cast, everybody knows how it's going to turn out, and we're down to 35 out of 435. 35, less than 10%, as being truly up for grabs, completely competitive. There are seats that we expect Republicans or expect Democrats to win that are close, but truly up for grabs where you don't know, 35. Now, I realize you can't see this, so I'm going to tell you what these numbers are. When you're looking at the gray, you're looking at the same information that was yellow on the previous slide. How many seats are up for grabs in the last election? 22. 5% of the total of the House of Representatives. If you take in the leaners and you add that together, it comes to 44. 10% of the House of Representatives is really competitive. If you step back and you say, all right, let's look at it a different way. How many seats is the candidate going to win by more than 5 percentage points? Here we have it from 1997 to 2024, and you can see that at one point in the not too distant past, more seats were swing seats than safe seats. Not anymore. Now what we're looking at is the vast majority. There's only 87 seats that were considered that candidates weren't going to win by 5 points in the last election. Which is why the Wall Street Journal said 2024 could be the closest election in a generation, not because it was competitive everywhere and we didn't know what was going to happen and it was going to be a nail-biter, but because so few seats were competitive. You could rattle them off. You didn't even have to try hard to memorize the numbers. So, could it be that all of those landslide seats for Democrats and all those landslide seats for Republicans are just reflecting real preferences, and those people are getting representation, and it's just that all the action is in the middle and that's where our attention is, and there's nothing wrong with that? No, it really can't be. That's not what's going on, and I'll show you why. Because the people that vote in primaries and determine who the nominee will be in general elections where we already know the outcome before we count even one vote are different from the people who don't. The people who vote in primaries are much more engaged in politics than the people who vote in general elections, or sometimes don't vote at all. And those voters, being more engaged, also are more extreme ideologically. They don't have the same preferences. And when they choose who is going to be on the general election ballot and walk into a seat in the House of Representatives, when they make that choice, they're choosing people that are also more extreme. This is an animation about polarization in the American public from 1994 to 2014. I'll let it run a couple times. What you see is that we move to the left, we move to the right. Right about 2000, we start moving apart a little more. The purple area, well, those are the purple people. Those are the people who oftentimes can go left or right. And then you see the extremes on either side. That's interesting, but it's not the important slide. The important slide is this one. This is that same data disaggregated. On the top, what you see are the people who are actively engaged in politics and how they feel about politics. And you can see that between 1994 and 2014, those actively engaged really started to go in opposite directions, right? But on the bottom, you are looking at people who are not actively engaged in politics, really all the rest of us. Those people still have a lot in common, even by 2014, all right? They're different. The people picking the nominees in primaries are the people on the top. The people voting in general elections are the people on the bottom. Now, if you've been paying any attention at all, we have not grown closer since 2015. That same kind of data isn't available, but this is a really good proxy. This looks at partisan antipathy, and so what you're looking at on the left side is of Republicans going up to 2022, how they feel about Democrats, very unfavorable or just unfavorable, all right? And on the other side, on the right side of that screen, what you're looking at is the people who are less engaged, the leaners. And you can see that there's a difference, right? It's the same thing. We are different, the people who vote all the time in primaries and are actively engaged, from the people who don't. Now, frankly, I'm not sure where the causal relationship is, but I can tell you that that's the way it goes. And I can show you what it means for the ideological preferences of policymakers in Congress. You're looking at the Senate on the left and the House on the right, and what you see between 1972 and 2022 is that they have diverged. All right? So Republicans today are more far right than they used to be. Democrats today are more far left than they used to be. This is another way of looking at it, and the reason that I wanted to show you this is because when you look at this is the House of Representatives, you see dramatic differences, right? Big differences. And when you look at this is the Senate, not so much. That's gerrymandering. All right, you don't gerrymander the Senate, you can gerrymander the House of Representatives. What do we know about political competition then in the most revered democracy in the world? Well, it doesn't really look so good. A small number of competitive seats, that number of competitive seats has shrunk over time, leaving only a small minority of elections competitive. A small minority of politically engaged voters choose party nominees in primaries, and they are, as a rule, more politically extreme than the general electorate. The politicians elected reflect those preferences of the extremes, and ideological division then reduces the tenability of bipartisan legislation, and it erodes our trust in government. So what does this mean for our representation? I've been telling you a story about two-party competition for primary voters that are more extreme, all right? But what about majorities? What about majority preferred options? We aren't going to hear about them when parties compete because there is no benefit to any politician coming out and telling you, hey, vote for me, I would do exactly what my competitor would do. I mean, do we even expect that? No, right? That doesn't even make any sense. So what are we going to hear about when they're campaigning? What we would do differently, what divides us. So let's think about what doesn't divide us a little bit. You can't see that. Can you see that? All right, let's pretend that you can see this. I'm going to tell you what's there. I'm going to tell you that on climate change, which has sadly become a divisive issue, that Republicans and Democrats agree that the government needs to do something about it. And when you identify very specific policies, even the most conservative Republicans want action on climate change, and they have for a really long time. When you look at immigration, you see the same thing, All right, Democrats and Republicans actually agree when you talk about individual policies, and you see majority support for a lot of policies. These are the two most divisive that I could come up with. These are the ones that politicians tell us, those people on the other side, they don't think like you. Well, they do, as it turns out. Now, if you weren't looking to divide people, you could talk about other policies. This came out of a Washington Post article that they presented this data. And when I was reading it, I realized the reason that they could. Because this was written by two people. One is a political strategist for Trump, another one for Clinton. They've known each other for decades, and they like one another. I know. And so, not only that, but they recognize all that we have in common. They know it's out there because they know each other. I have a very close friend who doesn't vote like me. We agree on almost everything. I'm telling you the truth on that, all right? And in fact, there are supermajorities for a host of policies. That top one is comparing Trump and Harris voters, as I think you can see, agreeing that we should have a tax credit for worker training. Those people in Kenosha, Wisconsin would have loved that. And the 4.5 million people that lost those manufacturing jobs across the country in all of those years since, and all of those towns that collapsed as a result. Worker training is popular because we know that makes sense. So do business tax credits for family and medical leave. Over 70%, Trump and Harris voters. And we also agree about our kids, as it turns out. Support for age restrictions on social media and to protect them from social media, you have even larger numbers. But do you know what gets the most support in that poll? Bipartisan support for unity. Believe it or not, 94% of the voters who voted for Trump want Democrats and Republicans to work together to make policies that benefit the majority, and 94% of Harris voters feel exactly the same way. Now, it's not in the interest of politicians to tell you that, all right? But that's the case. If we don't have competition, however, we've got no way of holding politicians accountable for the fact that they are not making majority preferred policies, and they are working actively to divide us in order for us to elect them, and extreme agendas. Gerrymandering and political sorting, what that means is that Democrats like to live in the same neighborhoods in the same states as Democrats. Republicans like to live in the same neighborhoods and even states as Republicans. That's happening. Gerrymandering is happening. But that allows candidates to win office simply because they have either a D or an R next to their name, whether or not they are satisfying their voters. And despite the fact that primaries empower the partisan extremes, voters end up electing them and electing them and electing them again. I know that they don't want to, because this is what trust in government looks like today. It went from about 75% in 1960 to what is about 20% or a little less today. About the same percentage of citizens who get to actually vote in competitive elections. Less than 20%. And yet, this is the re-election rate for the House of Representatives from 1964 to 2022. I don't know if you all remember, there's a lot of people in here who look to be my age. But do you remember when President Reagan said the Politburo of the Soviet Union would be jealous of the re-election rates in the US Congress? You know, I think he was right on that. This is what the Senate looks like. Not quite as bad, but absolutely not good, given the trust in government is at 20%. and we aren't getting policy responsiveness at all. So, it shouldn't surprise us then that when asked, the youngest people in this country, 18 to 29, are losing faith in democracy. I don't mean just ours, I mean democracy. What that shows you is that only a bare majority from 18 to 40-year-olds actually believe that democracy is always preferable. And in fact, 32% of 18 to 29-year-olds think a non-democracy may be preferable. A non-democracy is an authoritarian regime. There isn't anything in between, all right? 32%, and the next cohort, 27%. And I understand why. If I present all of this information to my students, why would you say our democracy is working? Now, I tell them, and there's some in this room, and they will know it, that I will tell them, I don't care how bad democracy is working, it's better than an authoritarian regime, all right? But I understand how they feel. I truly do. Americans have stopped believing in democracy, and they've stopped believing in one another. And the reason is because single-member district plurality elections, the kind that we have in this country, incentivize emotional, negative campaigns that depress the vote for your opponent and make your own supporters so afraid they have to show up. That's what they do. That's what wins elections. To create fear. As a result, we don't just disagree over policy anymore. Many Americans believe the motives of people on the other side to actually be evil. Nearly half of Democrats polled and nearly half of Republicans, when asked, do not see the other side as the opposition, meaning if they win, you just don't get the policies you want. Instead, they see the other side as enemies, meaning if they win, your life or your way of life is threatened. And moreover, in 2024, when a similar kind of question was asked, Republicans who believe that Trump won the 2020 election said that the Democrats are not just wrong for politics, they are downright evil. Strongly agree, nearly 50%, over 70%, at least agree somewhat. And for Democrats, in 2024, they believe that Republicans are evil, either strongly agree at around 15%, just under 50%, at least a little bit. Is this how democracy is supposed to work? Is this how democracy can work? If we believe the other side is evil, when they win, what is it that we are supposed to do? 1 in 4 Americans now believes that violence may be necessary in order to save the country. 1 in 4. That should scare us. I've just shown you, we actually agree. We actually agree by supermajorities on the most important policies. And even the ones that are divisive, we have majorities agreeing to a lot of the policy proposals. And yet, our political system has created such fear in the electorate that half of us believe that our lives or our way of life will be threatened if they get into power. This is not how democracy is supposed to work. The framers, in fact, warned us against this from the very beginning. John Adams wrote in 1780, "There is nothing which I dread so much as the division of a republic into 2 great parties, each arranged under its leader and concerting measures in opposition to each other. This, in my humble apprehension, is to be dreaded as the greatest political evil under our Constitution." George Washington said the same thing in his farewell address. Let me warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party. The common and continual mischiefs of the spirit of party are sufficient to make it in the interest and the duty of a wise people to discourage and restrain it. This is our responsibility. This is our democracy. Whether we are at fault for any of this or not, it is our responsibility to do something about it. And I'll tell you what we really can't do. We can't expect to keep doing things the same way and get different results. That's what we can't do. The way we elect politicians has to change. There are basically two choices for reform. We can either try to create elections where voters can see what they have in common with other voters, moderating the electorate. And the way we can do this is probably through ranked choice voting and potentially nonpartisan primaries. The other option is to adopt proportional representation in multi-member districts the way Europeans vote. Instead of just returning one person per district, you return something like 10. And you vote for parties instead of candidates. And then those parties are seated in the legislature according to their popular support. Get 20% of that vote, you get 2 seats. You get 40% of the vote, you get 4. And then those parties come to compromise and protect the vital interests of their constituents, but compromise on where they can, what they have in common. All right? Those are the two ways to do it. Fostering moderation in the electorate is the way most reform organizations have chosen to go. And there's a lot of good reasons for that, partly because the big problem is the division. That's what we're afraid of. That's what makes us afraid of one another. This is a system that we could easily adopt instead of our current plurality system where whoever gets the most votes wins. It's very, very simple. Instead of just choosing one candidate on the ballot and whoever gets the most votes wins, you mark your preference for your first choice, your second choice, your third choice. It's no different than we do most of the time. If you go to the store, I'd really like chocolate ice cream, but if they don't have chocolate, I'll take vanilla, but don't come home with strawberry. We do it all the time. We know exactly how to do it, right? And if we're gonna order a pizza, we figure out what toppings most people, right, are going to be willing to live with. Just so you don't put something on there I really hate, like anchovies, I'm okay, right? This is what ballots look like. I've got an example from Virginia, I've got an example from the city of Minneapolis, and you can see how easy it is to do. No matter what kind of ballot you use, it counts the same. Once everybody has voted, you count up the votes, and if any candidate has gotten a majority of votes, 50% plus 1, that candidate is elected. It's done. You don't need to look at second preference votes. But if no candidate gets 50% plus 1, then the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated and all their voters' second preference votes transfer to the party that they want, to their alternative party, the one they'll take. All right? It may not be perfect, but they could be okay. Recount the votes, and whoever gets 50% plus 1 wins. Sometimes this takes a couple iterations, but it rarely takes very many. That's ranked choice voting in single-member districts. 14 million voters live in jurisdictions with ranked choice voting in the United States. 24 states include at least one jurisdiction that uses ranked choice voting. 800 elections have used RCV since 2004. 40 million ballots have been cast. 2 states use it for all of their federal elections, Maine and Alaska, all right? Not exactly left-leaning states. And they do it because it creates competition in those one-party dominant states. Conservatives get to vote for the conservative candidate that they want, that are ideologically close to one another. Democrats the same way. And everybody can vote exactly like they want to, because spoilers aren't a problem in this system. You can vote if you want a Green Party, and if your Green Party doesn't win, you can give your second vote to a Democrat, all right? And you don't have to worry about it. And that makes more people come out, especially young people, because you can have an impact. Between competition and accountability, you've got better representation for the majority, because now it's in the interest of all politicians to say, hey, you might not, I don't agree completely with this other person, but we agree on a lot of things. You point out what you agree on, which is great. You get better representation, and you get more information, and you reduce divisiveness. Does it matter? Does it work at all? Well, let's take a look at Lisa Murkowski. She's the senator from Alaska, all right? This is just, I think, from last week. She won, from 2022. She won re-election in Alaska through ranked choice voting. That's where they use it. She didn't win on the first ballot. She didn't get 50% plus one first preference votes. But when you eliminated the candidate who had the fewest votes, she did win. And she beat out a Republican candidate on her right who had the support of both Trump and the Republican Party, and she beat out a Democrat on her left. All right? What happened? Well, right now, Lisa Murkowski is one of the very few Republicans who's actually using her voice to push back against the administration and her vote. All right? She could play a make or break role in this upcoming legislation. And at a time when the Republican Congress has grown increasingly deferential, she has veered in the opposite direction from her party, using sharp words and her vote on the Senate floor to push back. Now, I have to believe that how she's elected has something to do with that. She's responsible to the majority in Alaska, not the base of the party who votes in the Republican primary. That's a big difference, all right? Now, I am sad to say, for that reason, that in 2024, 4 states tried to get ranked choice voting for their state ballots. All of them lost by the margins you see. It was really disappointing, all right? But when you have interest groups who are powerful in our current system, plus the Democratic Party, plus the Republican Party, using their wealth and their resources to make sure that you don't get ranked choice, I'm kind of surprised we got the votes we did, all right? And they're going to keep on fighting. Proportional representation, as I explained to you, is a different type of system. It's a bigger lift because we elect in single-member districts here for the most part. But I have to tell you, it would be remiss if I did not admit that over 200 political scientists think this is the way we should go for our national elections. Scholars of democracy, a lot of people that I know and like and respect, and owe my education to, in addition, all right? And they want to go for proportional representation. I think that ranked choice voting is a lot more likely, but I will say that in the state of California, an organization that I sit on the board of directors of, ProRep Coalition, is trying to get proportional representation for the state assembly, for California alone. And I think that might just happen, and that might just work. California is a big, diverse state, all right? We're open to reform. We recognize that people all around the state have different preferences, different lives than we do, and their policy preferences need to be respected. And if there's a chance for multipartyism, I think this is a really good chance. In addition, the most important thing is that we reform across the country. And if California were to lead, what would happen is we would empower people who are not blue, because this is a blue state. So Greens would be empowered, purple, red voters would be empowered, and you would demonstrate that we are truly better together. Okay, thank you. I can take your questions. I hope you feel informed. Hi. Who's going to go first? Any questions?
Hi. First, I wanted to say that was a fantastic presentation, and the way you explained each step of logic was great. Why a person should care, why voting matters, why this is how we shape our democracy. Really good.
Thank you.
You got to the part about which voting methods we should switch to, and you only mentioned ranked choice voting and proportional representation. I was a little disappointed you didn't mention some other things like star or approval voting, that kind of thing. I'd like to know your thoughts on that. But if I had to ask just one question, you were talking about having the California State Assembly be proportional. Since the State Assembly is supposed to be more local representation and the Senate is supposed to be broader ideological representation, wouldn't it make more sense to have the Senate be proportional rather than the Assembly?
Well, you need a big body, and this is I can understand, all right, that seems to, I can appreciate how that would be the case, and maybe that would be a good idea, all right? But what we're trying to do is to get away from this idea that only one representative should represent a district, that every district has a variety of preferences in it. We're not all the same. And to make sure that the voters who aren't with that majority aren't left behind in a district. So to increase representation, I think it would be fantastic for the Senate. And if that was the best possible way to start, then we start there, but we need to start. As to your other question about star and approval voting, I would love to have a forum on the alternatives to single-member district plurality. The reason I focused on ranked choice voting is because that's what most places are trying to adopt. That's what we see across the country. That is an option that is probably going to appear on a ballot at some point near you. But I do think that we should talk about it, that we should talk about it as a polity and say, what are our choices? We can all understand this, I guarantee, and figure out what we want. But something has to change. Any of those systems is better than what we have right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Lorelei. That
Hi.
was a wonderful talk. Thank you so
you.
much. So I lived in New Zealand for a while, which has what's called mixed member parliament. So it has multi-member representation,
Right.
2 votes per district. You get to vote for an individual and you get to vote for the party. And I was very excited. I got to vote in 2017 for Jacinda Ardern, who's doing her book tour right now, if you haven't seen her, and she's great. And I had a really interesting experience as a voter there, which is that I found party dominated my ability to access my representative in a pretty negative way. Mm-hmm. And it had to do with party control, and it also had to do with, ironically, the very short campaign season and the lack of financial inputs. So a group of us from the district I lived in wanted to meet with our member of parliament. And he just couldn't be bothered. I mean, we couldn't get a meeting with him because we didn't have any influence over him. There was no hold on him. So that was my experience. And look, there are lots of people in this country who have that experience because they lack the political access, money, relationships, whatever. But I found it extremely frustrating, and I wonder if you were hearing anything about the downsides of, and the way that that happens when party dominates over an individual getting elected, or when party ends up controlling the allocation of power.
This is a good question, but hold on, don't give that mic back yet. When you said you wanted to get to your representative, were you talking about the person elected on the single-member district side of the ballot, or were you talking about the people that were elected on the proportional representation side?
I'm talking about the member specifically elected to represent the electorate, as they call it.
Yes.
Because
yes.
what happens is with the party vote, they go to list members. They go to people
Right,
that are on the
right.
party list. They got some great people, but that's not who was representing my electorate.
Exactly.
And the member, now granted, he was an old school, he was also the Minister of Agriculture, and we were there to talk to him, or trying to talk to him about animal interests, and he didn't care about us, but he didn't care about us.
Right.
And we had no way to persuade him that he needed to talk to us.
All right, so let me explain what's happening there. It's actually really important, and I won't go into detail, but that's called a mixed member proportional system. And when voters get a ballot, on one side you have a ballot that looks just like ours here. Whoever gets the most votes wins. That was the representative that you were trying to contact. It's exactly the same voting system. But the other half of the ballot is list proportional representation, the one I described where you vote for a political party instead of a candidate, and parties win seats in proportion to their votes in the electorate. They take all the winners and they combine them, and so in the legislature you have some people who are elected on the single member district side and some from that party list side. Theoretically, that individual, your electorate representative, is supposed to represent everyone. It doesn't work like that in New Zealand any better than it works like that here, all right? In reality, what most voters find in where they have party list PR, even on just half of the ballot, so that's New Zealand, that's Italy, that's Germany, where it was originated, and it's widely considered one of the best electoral systems in the world. Your party has to be where you go through. And you do go through your party because when you have preferences consistent with the party, they want to know about it and they want to satisfy them. And so voters are happiest with their party representation. The single member district side is really, you know, it's kind of a holdover. When New Zealand used to have an electoral system just like us, New Zealanders, through an initiative, chose mixed member proportional. They changed their electoral system, which is an incredible thing. But they did it. And when they did it, the only way they could get politicians to agree is to say, all of you who are getting elected in the single member district side, don't worry, you're going to keep those seats. We're just going to add these over here. And they were like, all right, we can do that. All right? If you were to try to change without leaving the politicians in place, they'd fight you pretty hard on that. So that's really more the way they go. People who are in proportional representation systems where multiple parties represent them go for the party, all right, that has the interests that are closer to their own in order to get satisfaction. I have a couple of people with questions over here, and I might start back there. Yeah, raise your hand.
I just wanted to bring up a few things. I think the biggest problem in this country is term limits. The statistics that you showed up there screams for term limits, especially on the federal level. Okay, I think one of the biggest problems in this country is we need term limits for the Senate and the House of Representatives. We have term limits for the president, and presidents come and go, but some of these senators do their whole life, or the House of Representative people. So term limits would solve a lot of these problems. As far as ranked choice voting, a lot of Alaskans are very upset with ranked choice voting. Utah is debating whether or not they will continue with ranked choice voting. And with ranked choice voting, you don't get the best candidate. You get a lesser candidate. You just don't get the best candidate. It's very confusing. You can't put your choice of candidate all the way across. Otherwise, your ballot is nullified. And one more thing.
Make it a question instead of a statement, please. So
I would like to know why you call this country a democracy when we are a constitutional republic. We are known as a constitutional republic. We are a constitution. We are a republic of 50 states. We are not a democracy. Europe is full of democracies. New Zealand and Australia are democracies. We have more people than those countries do, and we see why our country is still doing better with the divisions that we have, because we are not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. Thank you.
Oh, I will say that there were people who believed that Alaskans really didn't like their ranked choice voting and didn't understand it. And surveys were done and everybody understood it. It's as easy as counting to 1, 2, 3. There are some issues with, familiarizing yourself with the ballot. They did try to repeal it, and that actually failed. And they kept ranked choice voting because they like it. But in terms of a democracy, we are a democracy. Those aren't incompatible, but I'd say that I would agree that our democracy doesn't work very well.
I have a question about what happens if you just can't bring yourself to give any vote whatsoever to the third candidate. Is that going to foul up the whole system?
Of ranked choice voting?
In ranked choice
No,
voting?
no. And remember, really great thing about our electoral system is it's not written into the Constitution. We are not getting rid of the president. We are not getting rid of an asymmetric Senate, but we do have a chance to change the way we vote because it is up to each state to determine how they vote, all right? And so the states can all decide, and where ranked choice voting has been adopted, there are some slightly different rules about exactly how things count, but nowhere am I aware of where you have to vote for people that you don't want to vote for. You only vote for the ones that you would take, all right? So nobody has to vote for a candidate that they do not want to see in power just to have their ballot counted. That was incorrect.
So you just leave it blank?
You leave it blank. They don't get a vote. You can just leave it blank. You don't have to have a last choice. Yeah.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. So if we've been here and we're convinced today, what would you suggest we do about it? How do we go about spreading the word, or who do we talk to? Who do we write letters to? What would be the action steps?
Okay. Up there, I've got 4 organizations, all right? Californians for Electoral Reform, that's CFER.org, CalRCV.org. I don't sit on their board or anything, obviously, I know those people, but they are working for ranked choice voting. ProRep Coalition is working for proportional representation. I do sit on their board. And then RankTheVote.us, that's the national organization. On these, you not only get information, you can find out how to help, you can sign up. I've actually got a clipboard back there. If you want to put your name down, I will help you, all right? One of the things that I think we need to do is we need to make sure that our next governor supports it instead of vetoing policies, which he did, vetoing initiatives, laws, potential laws to allow localities to adopt ranked choice voting. What we found was that if you have ranked choice voting in local elections, that people like it so much they want it for the state, all right? And so that's what we need to do.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I have a question about money in the elections, which is an increasing problem. What does the data say about the effect of money? Is it a cause of some of this division, or is it a result of some of this division, or is it both?
I would say more like a cause, but I do want to say what every political scientist will tell you, and that is at any moment, if our politicians in Congress wanted to stop this, they could. That's the way it is. All right, at any moment they wanted to do it. Ostensibly, they spend something upwards of 60–70% of their time just trying to make enough money to be able to go out and campaign for the next election. I honestly believe most of them would rather not do that, all right? But yes, that messes this up. It messes this up. Remember when we were looking at who politicians are responsive to? That's that money in politics. And they're responsive because in all of those safe seats we talked about, where only a minority of voters are showing up, if you don't do what your interest group wants you to do, all right, they can primary you, and I'm using that word as a verb. They can fund a challenger that is good-looking and articulate and charismatic and will tell voters exactly what they want to hear, and that person who would vote for the majority preferred policy is out.
Okay, there's one more question up here if we can get to it, and then we need to wind up sitting in the library when
Again, thank you. I just as a side, are you familiar with the American Academy of Arts and Science Common Purpose?
Yes.
Common Purpose Project, because so many of their proposed reforms are consistent with yours, and I hope that there's a lot of working together on getting these messages out. But two questions about ranked choice voting. Well, one is just to say I was part of a group here in Santa Barbara that tried to get local ranked choice voting, and what we found is the initiative process is so daunting that you really need to first develop a pretty strong community constituency behind it to move it along. Next time we're getting you in, we'll get you into the process and get started earlier. But the other is, given that we still have the strong two-party system, isn't the most important place to introduce ranked choice voting the primaries? I mean, that's, as you say, that's where the system creates the demand, the winner take all at the extremes.
Right, and so now each state controls that, so you can have closed primaries that are only available to voters who have already identified themselves as members of that party. I have heard arguments that if what you really wanted to do is change the system, that if you are in one of those safe seats, change your voting registration to the party that's going to win anyway, all right? And then, as you said, that's an excellent idea, change to ranked choice voting in the primaries, but I will tell you, both the Democratic and Republican Party are against this.
The parties don't choose it on their own.
I think that we need to get our parties to support ranked choice voting, and if they would do it in the primaries, oh my gosh, I think that would be perfect. That would set us on our way.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that is controlled by the parties.
I know,
but the state system of ranked choice voting.
We are all so unhappy. We are all so unhappy. Something has got to give. And we are either going to have a revolution at the ballot box, or we are going to start seeing it in the streets. Now, I know we're short of time, but I want to ask my one student here, only one young person is raising their hand, and I need to let her ask a question.
Hi, Professor, what a great speech. I was just, looking around the room right now, and I wasn't seeing, I wasn't seeing a lot of people my age, and I was wondering, how would you recommend we go about trying to garner support of people, younger people my age, more willing to, make a change?
That's a very good question. I try to do that twice a week, every week at UCSB. And you can see me after the lecture, and I have some ideas. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thanks to the League of Women Voters for putting this on. I am grateful.